and welcome to Unwarranted Music Opinions, the show in which three music nerds all choose an album and force each other to listen to them. I'm June Lindberg. I'm here with Brian Courtney.
I'm here. I'm Brian Courtney. It's me.
Sure, glad you're here. And Chaz Jenkins.
I too am here. I'm Chaz Jenkins.
Well, that's great. I'm here too. And today we're going to talk about albums by artists that we have already discussed on the show at least once. It's a sequels episode.
Woo!
And we're going to kick things off with Chaz's pick.
So the album I picked is the 1994 release by faved band Chumbawamba. It's their album Anarchy, the infamous Baby Birth album cover album. So to give some more context, I went in more depth of the history of Chumbawamba the first time we've talked about them. So if you want to check that out, look for the underrated albums episode. Link will be in the description. Essentially, Chumbawamba is a band from the UK that have done everything a band can do, but this stage of the career is what they're most known for. This is a couple albums before the infamous Tub Thumper album, which features their most well-known song because they are considered a one-hit wonder, Tub Thumping, which obviously, as we've discussed, completely does not label what this band is about. It's just a little blip in their catalog, and they always get written off as just a joke band or a cringy, like, you know, oh, they made that one song, well, they're horrible. Nah. This band is like a full-on anarchy-punk band, against the man, all that good stuff, post-punk, anarchy-punk. But in this stage of their career, they were doing stuff like alternative dance and indie pop and a little bit of hip hop influence, a lot of sampling. But sampling has been part of their core element since the beginning when we did their first album, Pictures of Starving Children. And that is very prevalent here as it was in that album. But this main album, its main core is alternative dance. So there's a lot of like beats and sampling and not a lot of acoustic instrumentation, although it does appear from time to time, mainly in trumpet, which is used brilliantly here as we'll get into the discussion. I really love this album. Personally, I think I like it more than the debut. I think the songwriting is a lot stronger here. One of my biggest complaints for the first one, you guys didn't agree with me, but I just felt that the topics that they were talking about were a little dated because what they talked about was what was happening at the time. So it's just hard for me to relate to it. However, on this album, there's a lot of topics addressed that are more not as precise. Like they talk about homophobia, politics. They do address some specific things as we'll get into it, but I think that it's easier to relate to the topics addressed here than on the first one. But enough of my blabbing. What'd you guys think?
This album was a pretty big, just like Chumbawamba in general. You know, the first time I threw this album on, it was a pretty big shock.
Yeah.
This is like way
super different.
Shocking. This is, the first one's like, okay, you have no expectations because I didn't have any expectations. I hadn't really heard about the band. And then you turn this one on, and now that we kind of have like, an idea of what you think they're going to sound like, this one comes on, it's shocking. It's totally shocking. To the point, it's such a sea change where I don't even know if I liked it. I honestly thought it might be terrible.
Well, here's the thing. What's crazy is that after this era, they're a folk band, like pure folk band. It's kind of amazing how many shifts this band has taken in their long career. Yeah,
it is a total sea change. I think that at the core, their core message is still there, and the lyrical themes don't really change a lot. They just kind of adapt them to fit these like catchy alt dance. Even though there's a couple of more low key songs on here, like homosexual.
Homophobia, Brian.
Cut that. Cut that part out.
Don't cut it. Keep going.
It's called homophobia.
We know what we're talking about on this show.
That would really change the themes of the song if it was called homosexuals. Yeah, call them scum or something. Anyway, that's not what they do. They say homophobia is bad. So yeah, they don't really change the lyrical themes or anything up from their last few records. They just touch on more like progressive, socio-political topics, but under these like alt dance instrumentals, which look, I like this thing, but it is a little bit of a mixed bag in my opinion. Some of the rapping is kind of awkward. Some of the rapping is still kind of awkward to me. I love the Mouthful of Shit song a lot. Love the refrain on there. Love the Time Bomb. Love Give the Anarchist a Cigarette. Basically the songs that are like, still have those great lyrical themes that I identify with quite a bit. Just turned into like catchier refrains, but still pretty thoughtful.
This album really is all about those refrains that you mentioned, because it's very dancey. It almost sounds like late 80s New Order, like Primal Scream without the more rock influenced aspects of their sound. Just that very cheesy flash in the pan that was alternative dance in the early 90s, kind of this pre-Britpop weird post-Stone Roses.
And this album did chart. I mean, this did pretty well by
capitalizing. Actually, there's a dancier synth pop version of Homophobia, which the song on the record is actually very different sonically than the rest of the album, in that it's a kind of a sort of a traditional folk song type of vibe that you get from it. But that actually charted in the UK Top 100. And for the lyrics that it had, I think that's pretty crazy, pretty amazing. I mean, maybe we don't think about it nowadays as much as being so daring, but gay marriage was only legalized in this country like 5 years ago. And this is the early 90s that we're talking about. It kind of reminds you how different socially things were back in the day, and how it's kind of a bigger statement maybe than it might seem, especially if it charted. I think that's pretty wild. But like you said, yeah, it's all about the refrains. It's all about those punchy chorus lines that just get repeated throughout most of the song that kind of make up the foundation of all of the songwriting here, like on Time Bomb and Mouthful of Shit. I love how snarky some of these refrains are. Like with Mouthful of Shit, it's literally, I can't hear you because your mouth is full of shit. Do something about it. Which is pretty great.
That's probably the best song on here by a mile.
No,
it's awesome.
Bad Dog. Bad Dog's the best song on here.
Bad Dog's my second favorite too.
Bad Dog has
actually,
I don't know the names of the vocalists here, but like on their previous record, you have the male vocalist and the female vocalist. I think the male vocalist takes a step back a little more than he did on the first record. And it's mostly the female vocalist here who is really, really good. Bad Dog is where she goes full on punk. I mean, the rest of the record, it's this, chanty, dancey stuff. Bad Dog sounds like it could have been a song on their debut if it weren't for just some slight musical differences.
Yeah, Bad Dog is definitely my second favorite song. It's actually she's has my favorite performance on Pictures of Starving Children, with the second half of the song. I have to pull it up because I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's a deeper cut on the album towards the end where the second half of the song is her going through this just amazing, infuriated vocal performance where she compares women to dogs, and she kind of returns to that analogy here, I think, in a way that's just as satisfying. I definitely like the refrain on this one. I love the good, bad, bad dog, good, bad. Love that, like, in and out, so awesome. Such a great way to end that song. There's a lot of catchy refrains on here, a lot of stuff, and the attitude and the politics I generally agree with. Love the refrains in general, but I do want to say that this album does have a couple of flaws. Like I said, the rapping is a little bit awkward, especially on like this year's thing. I don't really like the bits in between the chorus there, and I don't even like the chorus that much, or pretty awkward, I feel like.
No, I love that song.
There's a couple of like little nothing interludes here that I feel like don't add anything to the record.
I think they do. I like the concept of like it's constantly flipping through channels. I don't know. I just really like...
They kind of do that. I think it was just so much more creative on Pictures of. I feel like it was much more purposeful, whereas here, with multiple listens, I don't really understand the point of these. It just feels like they're doing it to do it, like it's their thing. But I feel like on Pictures, there was such a point to the like Coca-Cola commercial bit. The lines before certain songs would kind of give you an idea of the politics going in, or would reinforce them, or comment on them in some way that wasn't musical. Whereas on here, it just definitely feels like doing it to do it. I didn't really catch anything in these little bits that enhanced the album for me. I just kind of didn't really understand them. Like the on being pushed, while it is kind of like a funny gag the first time, every other time after, it just becomes this pointless point between two songs.
The thing about it, though, is it's very short. It doesn't really bother me. To me, it's just them. And
I still get a laugh.
A little bit more with sampling.
I still get a laugh out of some of them too. Like you could really see Chumbawamba's sense of humor in a lot of the samples that they've picked. Like there's some, like a lot of us guys, girls hanging out, and we're not invited. That one cracks me up every time I hear it. The Homer Simpson one gets me. I just think they're really funny. You have never been a fan of interludes in albums, Brian. Like consistently since episode 1, you never really care for them. I always think when they're done right, they really add to just the packaging and experience of the album. But
I've said this too. There are interludes that are fine. I like them on the first Chumbawamba record. I like them on the Brockhampton records. I can't think of too many off the top of my head.
Well, there's not really any
always hated them.
Interludes in the pictures. They're part of the songs. Here, they're their own separate tracks.
That's what I'm saying, and that's my complaint here is they don't really do anything to force the songs.
That's fair.
Before or after. Like, I mean, yeah, they're short, they're not bad, but it's worth commenting on. I love Me. That's such a great song.
Yeah,
and I love
that one is so sticky.
It's lyrically, literally, it's
a take at Bono.
It's a jab at
Bono.
People. It's a jab at liberal people who aren't progressive enough in their view, and very specifically Bono. Like, it's basically an album. It's just a song of them shitting on Bono.
And here's the thing. Chumbawamba does not like Bob Dylan. The first track on this album is just a jab at Bob Dylan. It's kind of amazing how much they do not like him. They address his manager.
They're basically saying that he, in their view, talked about certain things but did not follow through with the ideas that he had. And I don't necessarily agree with that.
Yeah, I feel like if there's anyone you're going to go at about progressive politics, look, everyone's fair game. And honestly, I kind of agree with their critiques on here for the most part, but this one definitely seems kind of out of place. Like, Bob Dylan is, as far as like singer-songwriters who sing about politics, like very progressive, like, or was for his time at the very least. The dude was way ahead of the curve on a lot of shit.
Well, keep in mind,
very good.
They really got onto him about the whole, think of the first album. They got on a lot of artists about the whole Africa Live Aid stuff.
You know, I think they're really against commercialization and the growing gap between the classes in society. You know, the disappearing middle class, and so I think what their critique is Bob Dylan is rich. So this idea that he's some sort of anarchist or some sort of socio-political hero for speaking up about these ideas is, and I agree with this a little much because, you know, he's made. So for him to use his platform to say these things is good, but I think they're also kind of like, hey, you know, don't forget, you know, this dude is really rich as well. Like, he's made his way in and is able to say these things. So in a way, I can kind of sympathize with it, but you can attack anyone you want. I just feel like Dylan is kind of like Bono is way more useless than Bob Dylan. Like,
and Bono's in his like prime. U2 is at their prime by '94. Like, they are one of the hugest bands by this time. So it makes sense to go after him.
Plus, the line they're criticizing for is a little. I think they're using it, recontextualizing it, but I think the context of the original quote is, you know, a little hilarious to pull at, as if, you know, Dylan himself was taking it so seriously, just based on what we know about him. He totally could have been, but I think they recontextualize in a good way. And I actually like this song, but it is worth noting that I feel like that one is the only time I've ever felt like this is like a misplaced jab. You know, it sort of feels like how people go after popular rap artists now for saying crazy things and will like go out of their way to cancel them on Twitter or call them out for these things they've said in the past. But then Kanye can say a bunch of like completely brain dead.
It's totally hypocritical. And, like, it's completely hypocritical.
You know, it just seems weird to like go after Dylan of all people for this when there are acts who are way more like. I think it's way more valuable to go after the dead Kennedys who have been even more direct in their lyricism about the socio-political or just political direction in general of the country, but still use album covers of starving children. You know, which has a point, but you are kind of commercializing this by putting it here. Your popularization of that image doesn't so much shift public view.
Yeah.
So it's similar with the Rage of the Machine self-titled cover, right?
Yeah.
Immolating.
And that's such a...
And it's kind of like...
That cover is even more famous than the Dead Kennedys one.
Well, this image is insane. Once you know the context behind it, it's even crazier. But does that really give it a lot of value as an album cover? I don't know. You know, and I agree with that critique to an extent. But anyway, not to get caught up in... I think that conversation is important to this album, but really at the end of the day, this is not really out of line with anything Chumbawamba was talking about.
I just think the lyrical content here is stronger than the first one, personally. Songs like Time Bomb, Homophobia, Love Me, This Year's Thing, Mouthful of Shit, Bad Dog, Enough is Enough.
They do a lot of borrowing. Talking about the sampling, they do a lot of borrowing of refrains too. They borrow the Dylan quote. They borrow some on the last song here. They borrow a refrain from an old protest song.
They sample
borrow, which is fine.
They on Time Bomb, the "Stop Now, What's That Sound?" It's not an exact quote, but it's basically quoting "For What It's Worth" by Buffalo Springfield. Do you all know Buffalo? It's like a classic '60s folk rock band.
I mean, I know.
And that's one of the biggest protest songs of that era.
And then, of course, we have the last song, "Rage," with the Time Bomb
refrain kind of coming back.
Which kind of sounds like it's vocal. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's parodying. I think it's parodying Bruce.
I think it's parodying Bruce Springsteen. Yeah,
I think it totally is.
It's like doing this weird parody of Bruce Springsteen, singing this Buffalo Springfield refrain. It's strange. It's a weird combination for them to take that song and it's just like arena rock direction for the very end. Here's the thing about this record that makes it so great is that every single song here just about is super catchy. I don't feel like any song here ever goes on too long. I think that the refrains are all extremely sticky and in a good way, not in a like, oh God, get this song out of my head kind of way. I think that the whole album has this element of being theatrical. It's very theatrical when you start to think about it, especially like Blackpool Rock into This Year's Thing. And This Year's Thing is especially, he just sounds like a strange carnival announcer.
Which they do in, which they kind of touch that in the debut when he's like a big TV host, the opening track of that.
Right, he kind of re-embodies that, but this time it's like, I think what it's doing is criticizing politics as entertainment on This Year's Thing. I think they're saying like, this year's thing is this. People are interested in this, and next year's thing is something different. And people just kind of keeping up with stuff to be entertained, I think is probably the message that they are trying to convey there.
That's what I got, even though the lyrics are, I think, some of the harder ones to kind of interpret besides the refrain.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But I think the chaos is kind of supposed to mimic that of like a news cycle. We're watching like weeks run by.
I also think that on Love Me, did you know who I find that song reminds me of lyrically?
Who?
Think about it, Brian. Criticizing people for not being progressive enough, being really scathing and sarcastic towards certain figures.
Musically, does it sound like them?
No.
Okay, but just in the spirit, in the lyrics.
What do those lyrics sound like?
I'm on the spot. Hold on.
Very scathing. A lot of particularly precise references.
Is this someone I've picked in the past or something?
Someone that you know of very, very closely.
Oh, I feel so stupid.
Very specific political references, saying this is just a bunch of bullshit and stupid, just scathing.
The only thing I can think of is, the only thing that comes to mind right off the top is Father John, but I don't think that's really what it is, no.
Good old Gareth Lydiard. I got a little bit of Gareth Lydiard.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
From his, like, just looking at Bono and saying, God, this guy's so full of shit. Like, I feel like Gareth Lydiard does that same thing where he's just like, he hates people who are full of shit.
I think there's a lyric on a drone song about the guy from U2. Like,
yeah.
So, yeah, no, you're exactly right.
Well, for me, across the board, like, this is just front to back excellent. There's not a lot of complaints. The two weakest songs for me are Heaven and Hell and Georgina. I think topically...
I do like Heaven and Hell a lot.
I like the lyrical content of everything here, but those songs, compared to everything else...
Yeah, they're just kind of weak in comparison.
Pretty weak,
yeah,
honestly.
They're just weak in comparison.
I think they're just like... I think Heaven and Hell especially is like... This is one of the dreamier songs on the album. It's more low-key, but I think the chorus is super catchy and memorable, and it also only goes on for like 2.5-ish minutes.
My stupid, simple brain just loves the refrains, honestly. Like, by the time we get to...
It goes, da, 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 da.
By the time we get to Mouthful of Shit, I'm so ready for the 3 songs. Like, the 3 songs after This Year's Thing, I love that section on the record. Love the first 3 songs. Love Me, all great. There's a lot to love about this thing. And if it's anything like their first record, I think it'll only grow on me with more time, because the other one has become... I think when we do the epilogue, we should revisit the previous top 10 and see just how it would have changed, or see what we would insert or something.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Okay.
If we don't do that then, I would just like to say now that Chumbawamba went from being, an honorable mention to like probably within the top 5 of the show easily. in that time. So I think that this album has that same potential because there's just so much to come back to, and I really, really, really enjoy it as is now. Feeling probably, I don't think it's as good, or I don't want to compare it too much to the other one because I think it does have, I think it's a strong album on its own. But I think the first one is just a little more ambitious, a little more up my alley as far as angry, political, progressive, anarchist bands go. So I'm feeling a strong 7 to a light 8 on Anarchy.
Okay.
I am feeling like a decent 8 up to a strong 8. I think this album is, I should have mentioned, so well formulated as an album. Like, it's so consistent across the board and just flows. Some of the transitions on the songs here are fantastic. I just think they put a lot of effort and thought into making this as an album and crafting their songs and statements. But it's yet another very impressive effort from a band that I didn't realize that I was going to end up liking this much, but really deserved to be checked out.
Powerful, poignant lyrics, funny and interesting sampling, catchy songwriting, some of their best when it comes to songwriting. Only a few weak tracks that are fine on their own, just when compared to the rest of the album, just don't stand out as much, in my opinion. If I had to complain about a song, I think Give the Anarchist a Cigarette goes on just a smidge too long, just a smidge. But other than that, it's a breeze. And overall, I mean, this is a Chumbawamba classic. It's one of their highest rated albums. It's one of their most well-known in their catalog. I mean, strong 8 to a light 9. I think I like it more than the debut. Although the debut is more tighter of a concept, and it's shorter. But I just think that the songwriting really is so good on this album. And it's just such a breeze to sit through. And again, I'm not much for like a lot of political music. I gotta be a little bit in the mood for that. But I mean, the catchiness here, and like I fucking love Time Bomb. And I love that that's the thesis statement of the album, where like anybody can become an anarchist at any time. And I think that's why like the album cover is what it is. The album is called Anarchy, and it's a picture of a baby being born. I think that like that concept is explored a lot in a lot of these songs, while touching up on some other political topics. And like you've got songs like Bad Dog, Homophobia, that just fucking explore this topic with such ferocity. I mean, it's a treat, absolute treat. And to anybody out there, if you're still like, oh, Chumbawamba, Tub Thumping, like they're not a good band, you're fucking stupid. Go listen to this band.
I thought you were going to say something like, give him a shot, but you went straight for the throat there.
Yeah, I'm tired of it. It's like, and it makes it even worse for me because I love that song. So it's like, if you like that song, you're going to love the rest of this band's catalog. Check them out for sure.
My pick is Kero Kero Bonito with their 2018 album Time and Place, the follow-up to their debut album, Bonito Generation. This is, if you're not familiar, which you are, they are an indie trio from California who are led by vocalists.
They're from London.
They're based out of California now.
Well, but they're from London.
Right. Yeah, they're from London, but based out of California, I think nowadays. Or at least there for a while they were. I actually, where did I get that idea? I know they were in LA for a bit, but anyway, from London, based out of California for a little while. Whereabouts unknown at this time. Kero Kero Bonito.
We gotta get a search party.
Yeah, they're lost.
Led by vocalist Sarah Bonito, and then there are two other guys who make the music. One of which is named Jamie, the other one I don't know. This follow-up is a sonic change-up from their first record for sure. The first one is very, very happy. I wouldn't even say upbeat. It's just straight up happy. Synth pop, electro pop album. Very electronic. And this one is incorporating elements of, twee pop, still some synth pop in there, but really mostly it's a twee pop and indie rock kind of sounds. And pretty experimental too, which compared to the first one where there are no experiments, there are several experiments here.
I think it's not fair really to say that there's no experiments on the first one, because there is some very creative instrumentation there. And even though it's just more of a straightforward pop record, I do think it sounds somewhat unique in all of the different avenues and all the different styles that they pull from on that record.
But this one I think is far more like traditionally experimental. I guess it's the experimentation is less subtle, probably, is what I would say. Like the first one is so catchy that you might not even consider what they're doing on there to be a lot of messing around or, kind of experiments or daring. Whereas this one definitely traditionally is more daring. It's like, oh, that's really weird and sounds kind of strange. I think that's a good point. I think the first one does take some risks and is genre blending in some ways. I think this one's just so much more in your face about it that I think it resonates with my dumb brain. I've revisited this one more than the debut. I think the debut is generally thought to be the favored record. I definitely think it's definitely better that they went with that first rather than this, because that one was so much better at establishing their sound and establishing what the group was about. It's just such a unique release, even to this day. But this one is the one I always end up coming back to more, and I think for a couple of reasons. One, it's a little bit shorter than the debut, and the songs, I think, flow together a little more seamlessly, and that's purposeful. I think that a lot of these songs flow into each other. I think a lot of the album needs the album for context, whereas you can kind of get, songs like Lip Slap, Trampoline, Wake Up. A lot of songs off of the first one can be kind of heard outside of the context of the album. Whereas this one, I feel like you need the album for context for like the final cut or Fly Away. The themes aren't really any different. Like it's like slightly melancholy. I think
I don't know.
For the most part, it's still pretty.
This album,
I kind of disagree.
This album explores the thought of, it's super existential. The thought of death and what is beyond death is touched on all over this. It is super melancholy.
Honestly, I think that this album lyrically is a pretty big tone shift. Like almost
it's night and day. These two albums, night and day. Like
because when you look at it, Trampoline is a song about things are going wrong. Jump on a trampoline, everything is going to be better. This album is very much more. If Bonito Generation was kind of this childlike innocence, Time and Place is almost like a teenage angst. And I'm not saying that this is a super angsty, it's not like a cringy teenage angst record. It's just kind of about the fear of growing up, wondering what's going to happen when you grow up. Where is your life going to take you? What does it all mean? Kind of feeling lost in the world and small in the universe at the same time. And even though it sounds sonically fairly upbeat, it's very like dream pop, a lot of shoegaze kind of guitar tones in here. Really, really just, the guitar is very much like 2010s dream pop and shoegaze. When it doesn't get ultra noisy, and it does sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it sounds upbeat, but this is a considerably more introspective and just, I don't want to say anxious. It's not really anxious or worried about all this stuff. It's still relatively calming, but it's very contemplative over some heavier topics than the first one for sure.
So I'm going to go on the record and just say I like the first album better. I just think it's way more catchy. The songwriting is way more tight. And I just think that album stuck with me more. You guys are going to hate me, a lot of the opinions I have to say about this album. I think it's a mood album. I don't think it's something that I want to come back to unless I'm in the mood. Because when we get to Rest Stop, like I'm done. I'm crushed. Like it's pretty harrowing, especially in like the back half. And a lot of the lyrical topics, once you get into it, it's super subtle. But when you really dig deep, it's super existential, touches upon death and what comes afterwards a lot. And it's kind of surprising. And what's interesting is because when we listen to Bonito Generation, I even brought up in the review that some of the lyrical content of that album,
I knew you were going to come back to me.
Yeah, was a little it's a little dark. Like Graduation, I think that album is kind of got some dark undertones to it. You all disagree with me, but I really think
I think you might be the sole human being who has that takeaway. I don't know. I don't know though.
I promise you, if you really read those lyrics, I think there's something
I knew
there.
we were gonna listen to this and you were gonna come back and be like, I was right. It was, I don't have a rebuttal necessarily, but I knew you were gonna talk.
No, yeah. And it's explored a lot more in depth on this album for sure. The strongest things about this record are Sarah's vocals, which are gorgeous. The crunchy fucking guitars are awesome. They're so loud and crunchy, and the drums are loud, and it's just, the production is fantastic. And I adore from front to back every goddamn synth melody in this album. It's so freaking crispy. Now, you have songs like Acting Up, which on paper makes so much sense.
Like, full stop. There's not a song called Acting Up. Full stop.
Or what is it called? Only acting. I'm so sorry. Fake fan. Biggest fake.
Wait. Cut that.
Don't cut that. Only Acting.
And it's in.
Yeah. Only Acting on paper, when the song like stutters and skips and just goes into this fucking noise part, makes so much sense. I like the idea of like she's putting on this facade and has played into this facade so much that it feels real, and just the pain that brings. Because a lot of media explores that, and I think it's being touched on a lot more nowadays just because we're so enraptured in social media and the lives of celebrities that I think a song like that makes so much sense.
It's just a comment like on fame in general.
Yeah.
I think it's like a mission statement.
However,
what the record is about, or like the feelings that sparked it.
I don't think it works fully with the KKB mythos. I don't think I like the new set direction. I really like the upbeat, kind of like, how do I word this without sounding like I don't know what I'm talking about? Like bouncy, electronic, bubblegum bass kind of, you know what I'm talking about? I think the production...
I know what you mean by bouncy. I mean, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. I think the twee pop shoegaze is done well, but I don't think it fits with the image of the band. However, the lyrical content, I totally agree, June. Bonito Generation is like childhood innocence, and this is teenage, mid-20s existentialism. Teen angst for sure. I think putting the two, like they're the both sides of the same coin, and it makes perfect sense. However, this is the direction that they're going to take their music. I don't know if I'm 100% on board. Because it's so draining. Like, it's kind of a no now for me, where by the end, like, I just don't know if I want to listen to any more music. I'm just so like, damn.
I do think that the lyrics do touch on what you're talking about, how it doesn't quite fit that image of KKB. To me, I think this song is very personal to Sarah.
Yeah, like a song like Dump. Like a song like Dump is heartbreaking, and it's just about a pet. Like, it's...
But I think Only Acting is kind of this song that's her saying, I have this image of being super upbeat and happy all the time and the most wholesome band ever.
And it's just an act. Yeah.
But
yeah.
I have struggles too, even if my image is that. And it's kind of taking away the facade of, you know, like look at all their music videos for their songs from Bonito Generation. It's kind of taking that away. And you kind of watch as there's a bit of a breakdown, both lyrically and musically. The musical ideas here are like at the end of the song where it just goes into this glitchy, noisy, genuinely harsh.
Yes, it's crazy to me.
Sounding.
Like, we've listened to like a lot of post-punk and industrial hip-hop on this show that utilize noise a lot. And sometimes for me, I'm like kind of desensitized to it, but now you've all kind of ruined me in that regard. Like, it just doesn't hit. The noise on this album hit me pretty hard, like to the point where I was genuinely uncomfortable. I just don't know if I like that a lot. If they are to continue, I don't know where, and that's the thing, I don't know where they can go from here, because
they have released an EP, haven't they?
Yeah, recently. Songs. I don't know what it sounds like, or if it's any different than this album we're talking about.
It's closer to Bonito Generation, but it's somewhere in the middle, I think.
You can tell that Sarah had to get an album like this out of her system.
Right.
I just hope they don't pigeonhole themselves into this, because this could get really old really fast. I think, like, there's only so many times you can be existential.
I kind of get that, because people have been making indie rock and dream pop and stuff about all of the topics that are on this record for years now.
They work well on this because they're so personal.
It works very well on this because the songs are really good and the lyrics they're more in depth and they're not very just face value.
There's still an original sound here too, with Sarah's voice and the way the band
hearing these crunchy guitars and drums with these like kind of video gamey synth melodies is really interesting, and I think it works really well. However, I don't think the songwriting is as strong on this album as it is on Bonito Generation. I don't know how you guys feel about that. However,
I would actually agree. Oh, yeah. I'll let you finish.
Well, yeah. So you agree with me? Okay. But a song like Make Believe.
I have a caveat.
Okay. A song like Make Believe is a song I will always listen to for the end of time. That song is a banger. Like, it's probably my favorite song. However, I do love Sometimes, Outside, Flyway, Dump are great tracks as well.
Gosh, not to cut you off. Flyaway is like actually my favorite
I
KKB
love
song.
The lyrics on that.
The way only acting goes into it. And just the fascination with these birds on this song is just something. I don't know what it is about that song.
Well, she had
it's just so driving and like chaotic, but Sarah's just kind of like daydreaming a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. And then, just a great, great, great song overall. So short, but just does everything it needs to do so perfectly.
And Rest Stop is a fantastic closer. I'm really curious why the track ends the way it does. Because it just stops so abruptly, like another song is about to start. And like there's like final lyric there that you kind of have to interpret. It's really cool. It's not something I've really seen done before. For your album to just, like, we've seen some really interesting ways albums end. Like, Sophie comes to mind, how the ending of that album leads into the beginning of the album. So you could, like, loop it. I think that's really cool. That's, like, another example of, like, really cool album structure. But, yeah, June, I'm curious to see what you think about the songwriting on this. I want to hear your caveat.
I personally enjoy much of the songs on Bonito Generation more than the songs here, but that doesn't mean I dislike or think that this is too much of a step down. I think that this album is pretty consistently great in terms of songwriting, but it doesn't quite have just the euphoric highs of some of the songs that I adore from Bonito Generation. It does happen a few times with the main singles from the record, Only Acting and Make Believe. I also think Swimming is a really, really good cut here.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the use of allegories throughout this entire album. You have going to a beach that you went to as a kid and reminiscing, and that kind of making you think about growing up. You have going to a dump and looking at all the objects that used to belong to people.
Yeah.
Wondering who did they belong to.
Or Visiting Hours. Visiting Hours is a really good one too.
Visiting Hours, going and visiting someone who was hurt in a hospital, and at the same time being scared and sad that something happened, that this person came so close to death, but also feeling very happy that they're okay, and wondering about life and death and how uneasy the balance is in general. Rest Stop, which I think is another great allegory of just the feeling of getting to an empty rest stop on a long car drive, sort of being a metaphor for taking a step back in life and just taking stock of what you are feeling and how things are going for you. Yeah, like throughout this whole thing, I think it's very, very lyrically strong because it's very poetic. It's very thoughtful. There is a lot of very beautiful imagery. And Fly Away as well, I forgot to mention, is kind of just watching the migrations of birds and kind of wondering where they're going, wishing that maybe you could go with them.
Which is a metaphor for like, where's my life going? You know, where... Oh,
exactly. There's a lot of simple. That here, and it's done very, very well.
Yes. I'll never say that the lyrics on Bonito Generation are better than the ones on here. I think lyrically, like, this album steps it up to the plate. I just don't think the songwriting is as catchy as Bonito Generation. I think that brings it down. And songs like Only Acting or Rest Stop, the noise and the harshness are cool, but if that's where they're going to go with their sound, I don't know if I'm excited for it, because this is going to get old really quick, as I mentioned before, and I just hope that they don't pigeonhole themselves. I really want them to expand with this rock and synth and upbeat electronic music. I feel like they could really do some more cool stuff with it, because there's not a lot of bands that sound like KKB. They really have their own distinct image and sound and style. And of course, Sarah's vocals are so distinct. Like, you know when Sarah's singing. It's so apparent when she is on the mic.
gonna get Kero Bonito in here on the mic.
Yeah. I'm feeling a decent 7. I still think Bonito Generation is just a better album, but this album does have some pretty high highs that are pretty dope. I'm really interested to see where they go from here. I would love to talk about this band again. I'd love to talk about...
We will.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure we will.
But there will be a time and a place for that.
Yeah. Brian, what do you think? You've been kind of quiet. You've been letting me and June kind of go off.
Man, I love this thing. Y'all got to, don't take it from me. I love this thing. I think this thing is fantastic. I think it's as good or better than the debut. Resonates with me a little bit more. This is kind of like a reverse of the Kieran J situation where I actually think their debut is better at establishing their sound as a much more unique record, but I kind of like this one more, even though it doesn't have as many unique qualities as the first one necessarily, at least in the greater context of musical releases in general. But as far as KKB goes, sounds great, is great, lyrics are great, super noisy, super great, does these sounds well, does them justice without being derivative.
What do you give it?
Strong 8. All right. What do you want from me? It's one of my favorite albums from that year. One of my favorite albums in general.
I'm going to go with a light 8 on Time and Place. I do love it.
Garbage rating. God, I hate light 8.
It's a great album.
I know, but it's almost, I just feel like, ugh.
I don't quite adore it the way I do Bonito Generation, which has actually jumped up to like light 9.
That might
nowadays.
make it on your top. No, it was like your number 2. Does the beat get lost?
Oh God, that's a hard question.
Yeah. Oh, we should do that.
Get Lost might edge it out a bit.
Okay. We definitely may have to do that when we do our top 10.
We got to revisit. I think we got to revisit because I think mine has changed pretty dramatically.
Okay. I don't know if mine's changed, but maybe I don't know. I'll have to think about that.
For my pick for this sequels episode, I decided to revisit a band that we talked about not too long ago, Dog-Faced Hermans. A wonderful art punk, no wave, post-punk, crazy amalgamation of sounds coming out of the UK in the early 90s and late 80s. We previously talked about their album Hum of Life, which I absolutely adore. Like strong 9, you know.
Well, surely there's no way June adores this one too.
And I adore this one too, actually.
Wow.
We're listening to their final record, 1994's Those Deep Buds. And this album is different. It's more of the same, but it's different in some key ways that I'll get to talking about. It's not quite as furious. In that sense, it's not quite as blood pumping as Hum of Life can be. And for that reason, I think it takes a little more listens to really, really get vibe with it. But now that I've listened to it enough times, very consistent, maybe even more consistent than Hum of Life in terms of track quality. And I think there's a lot of fantastic ideas going on here, but I'll wait to talk about it, see what you two all think.
For starters, Hum of Life is better. Let's just get that out of the way. Hum of Life is consistently better across the board.
Oh, don't even start with me.
Reason 1, this album on its own is a lot tighter. The track listing, there's not a single weak track. Hum of Life did have a few head scratchers, specifically White Indians. Cut that track and it wouldn't have taken away anything. This one, not a single track I would cut. I think it ends kind of weak though. I just think the instrumental interlude is just kind of slow and a little catchy, but the ending of Hum of Life, so much stronger, in my opinion. But this album is basically everything good about Hum of Life, but it just doesn't hit as hard. It's got catchy bass grooves, phenomenal drumming, Marion's badass vocals, awesome trumpet playing. No violin on this one, though. Kind of disappointing. Really cool guitar work that only this band could think of. It's amazing. After we did the first Dog-Faced Hermans, Brian dropped a link to, or maybe it was you, June. Someone dropped a link to their live performance. And the way they got the guitar to sound like that on Jan 9 was because the guitarist was just whacking the guitar with like a rod or something. It's like, what? Just so out there instrumentation. Looking at the track listing, again, not a single song I would take off. But for some reason, none of the tracks hit as hard as any tracks on Hum of Life. It just feels like a watered down, like Hum of Life 2, Electric Boogaloo is what this album is. I just think there's a lot of quieter moments that sometimes go over well, like Keep Your Laws / Off My Body. Fucking great time, where Marion's vocals are really quiet. Callie, though, I think lyrically that's a really strong song, but I want, again, why the fuck is her vocals always underneath the tracks? I want her in the front because she's so awesome. That was like a big complaint I had about Hum of Life, and it's on this album too. And sometimes it makes more sense, and then sometimes they do, and it's just like, why? Why is this like this? I think it's more consistent, but I just don't think that it has the highs that Hum of Life has. Songs like Volkswagen, Blessed Are the Follies, Virginia Fur, probably my favorite song, love Virginia Fur, are great, but there's not that musical thing about them that makes them stand out. Like How We Connect has that amazing intro, Jan 9 has the really cool trumpet playing, Hook in the Wire has Marion's vocals. There's things about Hum of Life that just really make each track distinct, and here it all just kind of has the same energy. There's not really like a loud bumping song, as you mentioned. This one's not as ferocious, and I think that takes away from it. I really wish that there was some of that blood pumping, because there's grooves on here. This album grooves. Like Volkswagen is fucking groovy. Like the bass work did not drop down in quality since the last record. It kind of makes me sad that this was their last one, because this album is just everything good about Dog-Faced Hermans in a full package. It's kind of like they're at war with the Mystics. When we talked about that album, June, you were like, this is just everything that Flaming Lips does good, doing well. That's kind of those deep buds for me. But for this to be their last one, I'm kind of curious. We have a little surprise down the pipe. When that happens, I'm definitely going to be curious of the reasoning behind why this was their last one, when it seems like they were just getting started. I mean, this is only their fourth album, correct? They only have like four... Mm-hmm. Yeah, only fourth album, and it's 94. Like, they could have kept going. So, Brian, what do you think? I feel like I'm going to be in the minority with this one. I know June completely disagrees with everything I just said, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, the album is maybe not as refrain-driven or as catchy as Hum of Life. It's much more building and kind of... It's still as explosive and still as, like, dissonant and still as aggressive. Like the sound here we're not really that different sonically from where we were on Hum of Life, but the way that these grooves are building this time is kind of different, and the structures are a little less formulaic. I think the songwriting here is a little more not abstract, it's just less traditional structuring. They kind of wind, the passages don't necessarily, we're not just verse chorus or go from a verse to the refrain here. Sometimes there's a bridge that kind of comes out of nowhere. It feels like some of the songs here, like H Tribe into Human Spark, like that feels like one big long song to me. So I think the structure here is definitely changed up from the previous record, where similar to Time and Place, you kind of need the whole album, I feel like, to get everything about the record.
Yeah, I'd agree
understood.
With that.
You need the greater context. So the grooves are a little more building. There's a lot more tension. There's sometimes not a release for the tension either. Sometimes you kind of end with this like very tense, wound up groove with no real release at the end of the song. Sometimes you end with like on Volkswagen, sometimes you end with just the most explosive build up on the whole record, the most explosive release, in my opinion, on the entire record on that song. I mean, Marion is just screaming. Like,
she's downright scary.
It's like horrifying. Like very few tracks where music in general where the vocals are scary, like genuinely kind of scary. Lyrically, topically, I feel like we're doing the same thing here. I feel like we're totally in the same wheelhouse as the previous record. Things are maybe a little more poetic sometimes, but I don't think so. I think this is pretty much par for the course as far as our listening experience with this band goes. So I like this thing pretty much as Hum of Life. I just think it's just slightly different in that, the songs here aren't meant to be as catchy or as refrainy. But I kind of, this is a little more, I feel like you have to pay a little more attention to this record. It's not as easy to get into this one as Hum of Life. But I think the quality is pretty much the same, the exact same.
Yeah.
I just think they go about covering the same topics in a different way with the same sounds, but changed up enough to make this one certainly unique from the other one and to give it a different appeal.
Bring it, June.
I will partially agree with what Chaz said in that songs aren't quite as sticky as some of the tracks on Hum of Life. And when it comes down to my all-time favorite Dog-Faced Hermans songs, I don't really think it's going to change from being the hook and the wire and how we connect, Cure the Dogs. However, after listening to this album several times, I would agree with Brian that it takes a little more paying attention and the appeal is somewhat more subtle. I found that listening to this album for the show really helped me enjoy it more.
Mm-hmm.
I was already loving this record. I mean, it's Dog-Faced Hermans. They're doing what they do. Fantastic. Love the album. But I love it even more after doing it for the show because I was able to kind of read through all the lyrics, pay very close attention to everything going on musically, and there's always something going on musically. There's always some kind of noisy guitar line that's also catchy. The guitarist has a fantastic way of just completely drowning the sound in noise and dissonance, but also creating some kind of memorable riff or lick.
I will
the
say,
bass is groovy and sounds fantastic. The drums are cacophonous, especially on like Human Tribe. The drums on Volkswagen.
Human Spark. Oh man,
the drums across this entire thing.
Some of the best.
Just
yeah.
Fantastically well written.
And I will say the guitar work is much better on this one than Hum of Life. I wasn't too, like, there's a few guitar licks from Hum of Life that I liked. I was more on the bass and drums. The guitarist really brings it on this record. So I will say that is a step up from
it
the
might
last
be
one.
a little more accessible. The guitar might be a little more accessible here. I also think that topically, lyrically, it's changed a bit. It's a little more specific. Whereas with Hum of Life, there were quite a few different topics that were talked about. This one only has a couple. I think the majority of this album
major women's rights for sure.
Very much, yes. Focuses a lot on feminism, focuses a lot on just the experience of being a woman, and there's a
kind
lot
of abstract in some ways too.
Very abstract, yes. And I think that a lot of the lyrics on this album are abstract and poetic, and sometimes you have to kind of pay attention to what the music is doing to get the meaning of the song. Kind of like H Tribe, which is kind of a very strange track. You have a hard time deciphering the lyrics, but the song is this sort of tribal pounding groove that kind of makes things clear, as well as with Volkswagen, which lyrically is very cryptic, but sonically combined with lyrics gives you this image of like a rusty dystopian factory is kind of what I get from Volkswagen.
Talking about explosive vocal performances on Volkswagen, at the end of Cali, which is like this, probably the most surreal song on the record to me, is it just kind of, it's basically like tells this story. The end of Cali is like downright shocking, with the "get out of my place of business" yelling again, just to mention that.
Marion's vocals on that tune are pretty dope. Like her vocals
Marion's vocals on this entire album.
They kind of got
whispering to yelling.
Way more animalistic.
She did, and I think that's very pointed because there are some lyrics that reference this kind of animalistic power that she's saying that women have and should embody. There's a lyric on Virginia Fur. The lyrics on that song are a quote from a feminist novelist, Angela Carter. And the lyrics kind of embody this idea that women can have this natural savagery and self-confidence, which can be deemed unfitting by society and people in general. And I think that that's what Miriam was doing on this album, is trying to just embody this confidence and savagery and anger. You get that a lot on Lion Swell, on the chorus of that song. Keep Your Laws Off My Body is never explodes, but it's this seething rage with lyrics that are, I will not live in the dark ages.
The vocal delivery on that.
Clear as glass is my decision.
Like the vocal delivery on that.
Abortion.
The vocal delivery on that song is really a highlight for me because it sounds like she's singing through gritted teeth. It's like yes, you said, there's no explosion. It sounds like she's clenching her fist and wants to like punch the shit out of whoever she's talking to, but like really holds back. The anger in her vocals throughout are really explored. It's definitely better.
It's not as explosive musically, but I think that there's a lot that's just welling up. And there's also, and to talk about that idea of welling up as well, you have Lion's Well, which is this weird dreamlike story of these women going into a field and lying there and swelling up, like actually physically getting much larger to the point where men are frightened of them and don't want to touch them anymore. That's such a weird way, but it's like that. It just embodies this whole idea of like, we don't need you. You also get that a lot on my favorite song on the album, which I believe is in French. So I have no idea how to pronounce it. The Les Femmes et les Filles.
That was fucking awful. Don't even try.
You tried.
Les Femmes et les Filles von Dancer, which is the best song on the whole album. There's this like very violin-esque, scratchy guitar. The instrumentation is super groovy and intense. The whole band is just so tight on this entire album.
Yes. The playing.
I don't know what the lyrics are about. I know that they are about losing any kind of dependence that you have on others, because you have lines like 12 dancing princesses burn holes in the floor, losing themselves. Is pleasure encoded? It's just a song about 12 women in this room enjoying themselves with no men there. Is this gay? It might be gay. And if it is, I love it. It's great. I feel like this song might be about a lesbian orgy. It might be. That's all I'm saying. Don't look at me like that.
I mean, that's what I got from it as well.
Hey, we've talked about a lot of artists who love to jerk off. So like, it's fine.
And we're doing God as my co-pilot next week, so it's going to be even more.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the kind of song I got from it. Best song in the album. Lesbian orgy song.
I think Callie's the best. I think Callie's the best song.
Callie, I didn't understand lyrically until I looked it up, and I probably would have understood it if I had been alive and paying attention to the news around the time the song was released. It's actually about William Callie, who was involved in the My Lai massacre, which killed, I think, 17 unarmed Vietnamese people.
Mm-hmm.
So the story that she's telling is somebody going to his shop in Georgia, where he actually lived at the time that this was written. I'm pretty sure he actually ran a store at the time this was written. And there is a line in the song where the character says, about My Lai. And that's exactly when this chase sequence begins, where the song goes from being very quiet and strange and eerie to just frightening and hectic as she's running away from, it says, like the snapping of twigs from the large men chasing her. And then you have, get out, this is my place of business. Presumably, William Callie shouting and saying, get out, don't talk to me about that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a really, it's different tonally, and I think
it's
thematically,
definitely the most tense song on the record, and the
very,
most
very tense.
nerve-wracking.
Yeah, just the way she says, get out. Like,
the way it builds to that too, and that's what this album does, I think, better than the first one, is more patient, using these builds to using dissonance to build to even more dissonance, or explosive,
that's my issue though,
of the energy they wind up.
I'm not going to come to Dog-Faced Hermans for that though. I'm going to come for just the groove and the epic instrumentation that you get on Hum of Life.
For me though, I think you get that here as well. It's just a bit more subtle.
I don't know. I feel like the songs are way more quiet. They have their moments, and some songs are just groovy from start to finish, like Volkswagen, Virginia Fur, H-Tribe, and Human Spark. But a lot of the songs are way more subtle, as you said. I just don't know if I like that as much, because there's no subtlety on Hum of Life. It is just...
I mean, that's detailed.
Yes.
But it's more of just a thrash around kind of record, despite how detailed it is. And I might come to these albums for different things.
Right. That would be me. Like, if I want Marion's vocals at their best, I'm going to come to those deep buds. But if I'm just going to come to, for what I like about the band, which is on both records, I'm going to choose Hum of Life. I just think it's way more high. Like, the highs on Hum of Life are so fucking high.
I do think the highs on Home of Life are higher, but
this one is just consistent. It's super consistent. Like there's not a weak moment.
It's so weird because I think this one's just as consistent as Home of Life. I really don't think the differences between these two records are that vast. They're just like
I think it is.
I think there's some small changes.
I think it is, and especially in the vocals. It really is in the vocals that distinct these two albums. And for me personally, it's just a matter of which album hits harder, and I think Hum of Life does. But that might change because I don't dislike this album. I actually like it very much. It's just a matter of if I'm going to come to this band, what am I going to come for? And what I'm coming for is more on Hum of Life than on Those Deep Buds. Pardon my wording. Pause.
I think, well, that's not really your fault. That's mine. So yeah, this is good. For the record, this is just as good as the other records.
It's not bad.
Love this record. Love it just as much as the first one. Would do this band again.
It makes me wish that they released more music. It's kind of insane to me that they stopped here. To me, this is kind
of like, honestly, like this isn't like a perfect record or anything like that. I don't love this as much as
it's not a good ending.
Really, really good. Don't want to undersell, but I mean, this is just as good a place to end as any, in my opinion.
I don't know.
They really fully realized the sound they captured on Home of Life here by doing something different with it.
Right.
And we'll never know what they were going to do afterward because it didn't happen. But I think this is fine. This is a good place to end as any because I think it's really good in a different way for the same reasons. I am feeling a light to decent 8.
I'm feeling a decent to strong 7.
This album is like a light to decent 9.
Nice.
Whereas Hum of Life is a strong 9. Dog-faced Hermans. Marion Coots is like the greatest punk vocalist of all time. Yeah, that's right. I said it here. She's the greatest punk vocalist of all time, goddammit. This album is amazing. I'm a big fan. Junecore. It's very much Junecore. A song about feminism, a song about...
Hey, speaking of feminism...
Yeah, speaking of Junecore, what are we doing next week, June?
Yeah.
Next week's a regular episode where we can talk about whatever the heck we want and throw each other into the deep ends with some really off-the-wall stuff. I've decided to go with something very off-the-wall that I have no idea if either of these people are going to enjoy them at all, really. It's by self-proclaimed queercore band God Is My Co-Pilot, which existed in New York in like the early 90s. Very obscure, very weird, very noisy, very manic. I am slightly worried, but I also am glad to be able to force you to listen to this. We're going to do their second album, 1992's Speed Your Trip.
I thought I'd pick something a little bit shorter for this week. You know, easy on the ears. It's going to take a lot of time. So we're going to do Swan's 2017 record, a conclusion to a trilogy of records of theirs that are very well known. The title is The Glowing Man. It is a huge record. It's like 2 hours long. It's one of the biggest ones we've done for the show for sure. But was curious. I know June's general thoughts because I bring up Swans a lot and we talk about music a lot. And I don't think I've ever brought it up around Chaz. I don't think I was really into it around the time we did the show the first time. So, now's the time. And I think this one's maybe a little bit easier for Chaz to get into. And I think it's funny with the conversation we had about Dogface Hermans today. We'll reflect a little bit when we do this band's other album that I want to talk about. But we're going to start with The Glowing Man because I actually think that'd be a better starting place for you two to maybe warm you up to their sounds in a way.
And I'm going to do something that's completely out of left field compared to both of those. We are going to do 1st of October, a project by YouTube musicians Andrew Huang and Rob Scallon. Andrew Huang is both are very well known in the YouTube music landscape. Andrew Huang has a serious back catalog of all different genres of electronic music. His style is mainly known for sampling random things and making music out of them. And Rob Scallon is just a fucking excellent guitarist. His style is mostly math rock, but he does a lot of different genres as well. But 1st of October is their project where they come together and they have 12 hours to make an album, a full album, 10 tracks. They did it twice now, and we're going to do their second album, Gourmet Ravioli, which came out last year. And the reason they're called 1st of October is because they record the album on October 1st. I'm very excited about it. It's kind of a comedy album, but I think the songwriting is very strong and the lyrics are hilarious. And I think it'll be a good palate cleanser because both albums that you picked are very dense, and this album isn't that. It's just very fun.
This has been Unwarranted Music Opinions. I've been joined here by my two co-hosts, June Lindberg.
Hello.
And Chaz Jenkins.
Hello.
And we'll see you next week on Unwarranted Music Opinions.
Damn you. God damn you!